Hi, everybody. Megan Thompson here, and I wanted to go live today to help you as parents of highly sensitive kids structure your conversation. And if this is the first time conversation, structure your first conversation about race in your home with your child. Hopefully, it's not the first conversation, and it absolutely won't be the last. And so when we think about what we're talking about today, obviously we are in a period of time where the world is reacting significantly to strife and frustration and outrage based on the recent police brutality events. And it's also important to understand that this has been going on for a long time. And so we think about what our topic of conversation is today. I really wanted to add points of thought and suggestions in terms of how to phrase a discussion about race with your children, and as well as looking at it from the perspective of parenting highly sensitive kids. And it's also important to understand that I am not an expert in this field, and so I will be sharing resources with you so that you can educate yourselves. So a little bit about my background. Again, I'm a highly sensitive parent coach for parents of highly sensitive kids. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and registered play therapist supervisor in the state of Maryland. And I run a private practice where we specialize in working with highly sensitive kids and highly sensitive teens. So our objective today is to learn about how to have the conversation about race with your children. And I'm going to be sharing that from the perspective of a white woman. So it's very important to just call out the fact that I don't have all the answers and that I am going to try to not put my foot in my mouth. And it's very possible that I will. And I'm open to any and all feedback related to that. That does not need to be sent to me in a private message. You can post that right here in the bottom of this feed because it's not my job to get defensive. It's my job to learn. And so when we think about the experiences that I want to address for you, please be sure to read my post that I put down yesterday to help give the context and framework for this conversation in terms of helping you as parents start a conversation or perpetuate a conversation effectively about race in your households, especially if you're white. So when we think about what that means for children, it's important to understand the research. Children above ages 3 months can distinguish the difference between someone who has a different skin tone than their parents or than themselves. Studies have shown that children over the age of 3 months will linger looking at somebody who looks like them more so than somebody who doesn't look like them. And white children tend to prefer, beyond age 3 months, research has demonstrated, tend to prefer to engage with other people who look like them compared to other children of other races. And so it's very important to understand that it is ingrained in white culture that we are to prefer white people. And that has to stop because it is the foundation of racism. And it is our job as white people to shift that dynamic and to recognize and honor how outraged people of color are at this ingrained thing that we teach our children consistently. And so when we think about that, no age is too young to have a conversation with your children about racism and to work towards becoming not just informative about the concept of race, but work towards being anti-racist. That means, and there's been several prominent leaders in the African American community, but President Obama had said this before. Being anti-racist isn't just about not saying the N-word or teaching your kids not to say other racial slurs. So that's very, very important, and that's part of what we're going to be speaking about today. So I did take notes, again, as I mentioned before, so that I try my hardest not to put my foot in my mouth, and it's also true that, again, if I do, let me know. I can take the feedback and learn. So what I did is I took a all-encompassing definition of racism for us to understand what we're talking about here today. And as a result, that is up for debate in terms of different experts who will say it in a different way. And so just recognize that. Again, this is not my expert field of study, and it's also true that I've worked with marginalized populations for my entire career. And it's, again, as I mentioned before, I'm also white, so we're still learning. And we have to learn better and do better and learn more and learn faster and fix it faster. So when we think about what racism actually is, I am using the definition by dismantlingracism.org. And racism is considered a race prejudice and social and institutional power that is designed to, and I'm ad-libbing here, that is designed to create a system of advantage based on race. And as a result, it also creates a system of oppression based on race, and racism can be considered a white supremacy system. And when we think about this in terms of your interpretation of racism, especially if you're white, it's important to understand that you are likely experiencing or have been taught to be racist, even if you haven't been taught to be a white supremacist. So we think about people who are way on the other end of the spectrum, white supremacy, Aryan Brotherhood, etc. It's important to understand that even if you don't identify as someone in that extreme level of racism, it is also very true that growing up in the United States, it is very, very likely, and by very, very likely, I mean 99.9%, that you have been taught part of the system of racism. And if you haven't, overtly, you have heard it, you've experienced it, and it's been ingrained in you through the system that we have here in the United States and across other cultures in other countries as well. But I'm in the US, so I'm going to speak about that. So when we think about that, what we're focusing on is recognizing that racism is, and understanding racism and being anti-racist is the acknowledgement that people of color experience racism on a daily basis, even if we don't want to believe that, because it's not our job to invalidate other people's experiences, especially people of color. So we basically, as white people, have to suck it up and recognize that it is our job to turn this around. Even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, even if it makes us feel awkward, even if we don't believe it, we have to listen. Because not having a belief is no excuse for not looking into learning more. So what that means at this point is that people of color, people with a skin color who are different than white, they experience being considered less than, or experience a disadvantage, or experience can experience angry feelings or hate from others just because of the color of their skin. And that's a phrase that you can use with your child. And so when we think about understanding and defining racism for the brief amount of time that we have today, the focus now is on, okay, what do I do with that? How do I explain it to my child? Highly sensitive children, as we know, are much more aware and focused on the morality and justice in the world. And so it's likely that your highly sensitive child is significantly moved, disturbed, frustrated, angry, worried, sad, sickened by what's happening in the world. And so when we think about what's going on, it's important to understand and observe that it is your job as a parent to address that and to not tell them that everything's going to be okay, or it's not something that they need to worry about. And that obviously will not dissipate their worries, so it's quite dismissive. So when we think about needing to shift that, we have to teach. So when you think about recognizing this, when white people choose not to say anything when another person says racist things, we are participating in that racism. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to ensure that I was using my platform to call this out. And it is not lost on me that the majority of the people who are in my Facebook group, the majority of the people who come to my private practice at this current moment, based on the population that we serve, are white or are and so when we think about that, it's important for me to stand up and just to make those comments, because I need to make sure that everybody that my companies serve and everybody who hears from me feels comfortable that I honor their experiences and that I'm here to learn and to help other people learn and honor the experiences of non-white people. So when you're experiencing this and explaining this to your children, it's important for you to share a little bit about science and the concept of skin color, and then help them ask questions. So what I want to do today is share phrasing for you, because this is something that I do frequently with my clients, give you the exact words to say to help decrease the intensity of not saying it right. And with that being said, you will need to continue to learn from people who are more expert at this than I am. And I will share those resources, as I mentioned before. So when you're speaking with your child, you can say something, and again, I mentioned I'm reading this, so let me see if I can move it so it looks less like I'm looking off screen. You can say that we all have melanin in our skin, and melanin is a chemical, my assumption is, please excuse me, that shows up on our skin based on the climate that our ancestors were raised in and experienced in, that they grew up in. And what that means is that there's nothing wrong with anyone who has a different skin tone or different colored skin than we do. And their skin tone does not make them different either. And what that means in terms of differences is that that doesn't make them less than us. And so two things are true. They have a different skin tone than us, and the fact that they have a different skin tone doesn't mean that they're different than us. So we have to help children, especially highly sensitive children, learn to live in the gray, because they can be very black and white. And that is really important, especially when it comes to race. So it's important to get to know people of different skin tones, and sharing this with your child, that this is important, because it's likely that we have a lot in common with many people that we meet, including those of different skin tones. And so if you have a question about the color of anyone's skin, you can ask me. If you have a question about what anyone says about the color of anyone's skin, it's important that you tell me. If you have a question, and it's important to me and for you that you learn not to judge people by the color of their skin or how they look or the decisions that they make. So when we think about not judging others and teaching our children not to judge others, even though especially highly sensitive kids are strongly focused on morality, it is important to help your children to not be judgmental and to come at the world with from a place of managing their own feelings without sharing judgments and making decisions based on judgments. And so it's important for us to add that value into the concept and the conversation about race. You also want to help your child learn that they can share with you if they observe things, and that you really implore them to share with you if they are witnessing racism. And so share with me if you feel worried or afraid that anyone's actions when they are mistreating anyone whose skin color is different than yours. It's not kind to mistreat anyone, especially when they are mistreated because of the color of their skin. And so you will also share with your child that you can help them manage their feelings about how it's difficult to witness racism and how it's difficult to witness mistreatment. And you will help them figure out what to do to then help that person who is not treated well. And you as the adult, it's important for you to increase your education about what to do when you notice that other children are experiencing racism, to bring it to the two people in charge of the community to share and reach out to people who are who are being marginalized, to reach out to the families whom your child has witnessed that racism, and to communicate your frustration, your outrage, your disapproval when other children are learning racism and making decisions where they are mistreating others based on their race. And it's important to understand that in today's culture, it feels taboo to correct children. And while there is a certain level of tact that needs to be used when you correct someone else's kids, it's also important as white people that we don't let it slide and let the parents handle it if we observe racism in children. And that is important to understand, that we correct that behavior. Hey, I heard that word that you said, and that word is not appropriate and it is not effective. Share with me what you were thinking about when you were using that. Or Tell me a little bit about what you're concerned about, or tell me more about what's on your mind. And when you give a child the opportunity to explain themselves in a way that calls them out on it but is not judgmental, you can open up a dialogue and you can share with them that that's not acceptable without scolding them or condescending them or helping them see without feeling like they will shut down or yell back at you. And quite frankly, as white people, even if their parents come at us and yell at us, that's our job to correct. We need to stand up. We need to stand alongside our people of color who have been standing up in and laying down their lives for this issue of racism for centuries. And it is our job to get uncomfortable. Now, that's important because, and you know, if you've followed me before this video, it's not something that I shy away from in terms of discussing uncomfortable topics, especially when it comes to helping raise children so that they don't engage in ineffective behaviors that could be life-threatening. And that also plays into aggression. And if your child is struggling with being aggressive towards someone else, then we have to help you manage that and shift that dynamic. And racism is a form of aggression, even if they are not yelling, even if they are not threatening the life of. They are still aggressive. And that is important to shift and to turn around and to fix. It's a problem that needs to be fixed. But not from a place of telling your child that they are bad or wrong and scolding them and shaming them so that they never learn, because shame doesn't teach either. So we have to do it in a way that allows your child to be open and available for learning, just like they need to be emotionally open and available to learn academically. And if your child is not being taught in that way and you struggle with validating your child's emotions while also teaching your child how to use effective behavior and not reinforce ineffective behavior, then I would encourage you to reach out. But that is not the purpose of this conversation in terms of whether or not you need to seek help from me particularly. The video that we're making today is to encourage you as parents to step up, to start ordering books if you don't have anything at home, to do your research, to spend the time instead of watching Netflix this week and learn and read and absorb information about how to effectively discuss race with your family so that you don't turn a blind eye next time, so that you know what to say next time, so that you know how to look at and treat other people who look different than you, so that we do not perpetuate an experience of lack of safety and as a result condone police brutality through constant and frequent ignoring of racism in our culture. So when my last 2 cents in terms of what I would encourage you to do is to help your child learn about history. And when we think about that, it's important to understand and to reference your sources. And again, like I said before, in the comments, I will post various links that appear to be effective for me based on my knowledge and my experience and my conversations and my learnings over the course of my career. And it's also true that, as I mentioned before, I don't know everything and is not my specialty. But what I think is very important, and one experience that stands out to me where I was racially invalidating to an African-American fellow student of mine, is that in grad school, when I was in grad school, and I was raised in Massachusetts, and so, you know, up in the Northeast, and she was raised in the South. And we were in our multicultural counseling class, and she had mentioned that the history books share falsehoods about African American history. And growing up, she learned things about American history books in the public school system had either brushed over, fluffed over, or completely turned around the story of African American history in our country, the history of slavery, the history of the Civil War, all of that. And so when we think about that, when I heard her say that, I said, no way, that can't be it. Like, that's crazy. That's insane. Like, why would somebody write a book and why would a school pick that? And she looked at me and she said, whether or not you think, I'm not speaking verbatim, but she basically said, It's true whether or not you think it's crazy or not. And I, at that point, was like, I have a lot to learn. And that was my first experience. But I think it's important for you as parents to not trust the American school system to teach these lessons to your children. You have to do your own research. You have to recognize that systematic and systemic racism is going to be in every system. And so therefore, it is in the public school system, whether you are aware of that or not. And it's important to understand that because this is such a pervasive problem, we have to educate ourselves. There is no excuse for ignorance in the information age. And so again, like I mentioned before, it's important for you to continue to learn about what to say to your kids. Watch this video again, take notes, ask questions, post your questions in the chat, re-listen in a different way, ask yourself questions, notice your own emotions when I speak about this and how that impacts your response. And then also, and lastly, don't expect people of color to be obligated to teach you about their culture. Take responsibility for the education of your children regarding race, just like you do for academics, just like you do as you're here for your child's emotional health. It is not the job of the oppressed to teach us why what we're doing is oppressive. So, on that note, again, as I mentioned before, I will post the links below. I will also post the link to my post yesterday if you hadn't had a chance to read that. It is important for you to understand why the concept and the understanding of saying Black Lives Matter has to be separate when considering the fact that everyone else's life matters, that this is enraging for the Black community for very specific reasons. And I wrote down why that is and taught you in that post. And so make sure that you read that as well. So that's it for me today. Again, I encourage any and all questions. I encourage any and all challenging of what I shared today, any and all correction of what I shared today. And it's important to understand that for those whom are white, if the dialogue becomes aggressive and you are not willing to learn, then I will not tolerate that. So it's important that people of color are safely honored in this conversation. So that's it for me today, and have a good week. Try and get to work, I guess is what I should really say, because it's difficult to have a good week right now. So find the moments for growth, find the opportunities for growth, and notice that. And look, as Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers. Look for ways in which the world is trying to figure this out and trying to turn this around. And let that help you dissipate your outrage so that you can take action. Anger gives us an opportunity to find where we can act. And it's also true that if we don't have the skills to act effectively, we will act ineffectively. And that doesn't help anybody.